Drug legalization has long been a heavily debated and controversial topic, with advocates and opponents expressing strong arguments for their respective positions. Proponents of drug legalization argue that it would help reduce crime rates, generate tax revenue, and free up resources for law enforcement to focus on more serious and less. They argue that drug use should be treated as a public health issue rather than a criminal one, and that legalizing drugs would allow for regulation and harm reduction. On the other hand, opponents of drug legalization highlight the potential negative impact it could have on public health and safety. They argue that legalizing drugs would increase access and availability, leading to higher rates of addiction and substance abuse. They also fear that it could send the wrong message to society, normalizing drug use and undermining efforts to prevent drug abuse. Proponents of drug legalization often point to the potential economic benefits it could bring. They argue that legalizing and regulating drugs would create a new industry, generating significant tax revenue and job opportunities. Additionally, they claim that by diverting resources from law enforcement and the criminal justice system to addiction treatment and rehabilitation programs, society could better address the root causes of drug abuse and addiction. Supporters of drug legalization also argue that the war on drugs has disproportionately targeted minority communities, contributing to systemic racial inequality within the criminal justice system. Opponents argue that the potential risks outweigh the benefits. They raise concerns about the impact of drug legalization on public health, particularly in relation to the increased accessibility and availability of drugs. They argue that legalizing drugs could lead to a surge in addiction rates and substance abuse, putting individuals and communities at risk. Furthermore, opponents believe that legalizing drugs would send the wrong message to society, normalizing drug use and undermining prevention efforts. They emphasize the need to prioritize public safety and the well-being of individuals over potential economic gains. One of the key arguments in favor of drug legalization is the belief that it would help combat the black market and reduce crime rates. Proponents argue that by legalizing drugs, the government could regulate their production and distribution, thereby eliminating the need for illicit drug trade. They believe that this would not only reduce associated crime rates, such as drug-related violence and gang activity, but also create a safer environment for drug users who would have access to regulated substances of known quality and potency. Furthermore, they assert that legalizing drugs would allow law enforcement to focus their efforts on more serious crimes, enhancing overall public safety. Opponents argue that drug legalization would not necessarily lead to a decrease in crime rates. They believe that legalization might inadvertently create new challenges, such as an increase in drug-related traffic accidents and an influx of users who may commit crimes to sustain their addiction. They also express concerns about the potential for an overburdened healthcare system, as more individuals seek treatment for drug-related issues. Critics of drug legalization emphasize the importance of maintaining a strong stance against drug use to deter potential users and protect society from the potential consequences of increased drug accessibility. In conclusion, the debate surrounding drug legalization is a complex and multifaceted one. Proponents argue that it could lead to reduced crime rates, economic benefits, and a shift towards a more compassionate approach to drug users. On the other hand, opponents express concerns about public health and safety, potential increases in addiction rates, and the normalization of drug use. Ultimately, finding common ground and exploring alternative approaches to combating drug abuse and addiction remains crucial. The discussion should prioritize evidence-based research, empathy, and the well-being of individuals and communities.